the positive applications. This is really one of the most powerful parables of Jesus. He gives us a lot of good advice using this little story as a starting point. The positive things that he says to us are, number one, be shrewd. This guy was very clever. He did it to line his own pockets, and he was very selfish. But what he did was clever. He actually manipulated the situation to his benefit. And he did it in a way that his boss couldn't do anything about it, because he actually benefited from his boss's revenue without actually taking money from him by getting these other people indebted to him. He was a very clever guy, very shrewd. You got to give him that. You might not like the guy and you wouldn't want him working for you, but he's clever. And Jesus says that the sons of this age are more clever, more shrewd than the sons of light. And he was bemoaning that fact, actually. He was saying, this is a pity that all the smart people are lining their pockets and nobody's actually doing that kind of work for the kingdom. So I was encouraging you guys to think about what you have natural aptitude at doing, and encouraging you to use it. Do it. Use it. Be clever. Be smart. Be savvy about your work for Him. The warning to the Essenes in this same vein is that they were actually not clever at all in the way they handled money. And so that brings the whole issue of money into this subject, and it's going to become now a major issue that Jesus is going to talk about, money. The problem with the Essenes is that they thought all money was evil. And the point that Jesus is making with this parable is that money isn't evil, only if it controls you. It's very dangerous because it's very good at controlling us. But to say that all money is unrighteous mammon, is evil, is really kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because your reason for being here is to love others. To love others all the way into God's presence. And you can do that with money. I mean, that sounds a little bit like, I told you last Thursday, it sounds a little bit like buying friends. But that's not really what Jesus is talking about. Although He would say, yeah, go ahead, buy friends. Use your money to serve other people. Don't just think that money is all bad. There is a real virtue to possessions in that it gives you the opportunity to serve others with them. In all honesty, if you follow Jesus' advice in the sermon, where He says, if somebody asks for your cloak, give him your shirt also. I mean, by the end of the day, you're going to be poor and naked and homeless because you've given away your home, you've given away, That's all really nice, okay? You gave away everything. But now look where you are. Now you're in the position of needing somebody to give you something. I don't think Jesus meant give everything away, because I don't want you to have anything. I think he meant this stuff that you have, let go of it. Like, hold it with an open hand, okay? It's no big deal. If somebody needs something, show them show them the kind of radical generosity that God shows you. You can't do that without money. So this voluntary poverty of the monks and the desert ascetics and the monastic movement in the early centuries of the church, it was very spiritual looking. But essentially, they're shooting themselves in the foot the same way the Essenes were doing, because you've deprived yourself from one of the most significant ways of loving and serving, helping others. And that is by having things and controlling them and not letting them control you. You be in control of this stuff. And this money isn't evil. This money can be the love of God to somebody else. That's what it can be. So money is only unrighteous if it rules over you and controls you. That's one of the biggest problems that the Essenes had in their approach to worldliness. And here we have Jesus' criticism of that. And he says instead, use money not for yourself, but for others, so that they might welcome you into eternal homes. And use that beautiful illustration of this guy who, in the story, who got people to open up their homes to him by lowering their debt. And Jesus says, you know what, this notion of welcoming, I can use that. Imagine you loving someone else and them later welcoming you into heaven. What a beautiful, awesome experience. What a privilege to be able to think that when somebody thought about the presence of God in their life, they thought of you at the same time. What an honor to be able to be a channel of God's presence in another person's life. So that when they thought of God and His goodness, they thought of you. The negative applications of this parable are considerable. And this is where Jesus sort of takes a shot at what we all dislike about this guy, and that is that he was a scumbag. Okay? He was unfaithful to his master. He was unfaithful with what his master had entrusted to him. Okay? In that sense, he is the antitype of a good disciple. And don't be like him. Do not be unfaithful with what has been entrusted to your care. And that gets us to the important point. And that is that everything you have, possess, everything you own, every talent that you have is entrusted to you. It is not yours. It's entrusted. And you will answer for your use of it to the one who gave it to you. Just like the steward did. And so everything that you have and your talents, your resources, your wealth, your prosperity, your gifts, everything. Yeah, Evan.
How much is a talent? Like in today's value, how much do you think it would be?
Oh, a talent. In monetary terms?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think a talent is about, I think it's about 100 days' wages. So if you make $100 a day, it'd be like $1,000. A talent would be that. By the way, you know, the parable of the talents is a parable about money in Matthew. And it was through that parable that talent in the English language actually came to mean an ability. Yeah. But yeah, it was a monetary thing, and essentially it was quite a significant sum of money. I mean, if you make $500 a day, like some people do make $500 a day, it would be about $5,000. I think that's true. I think that's what it is. But I'll check on that and I'll tell you. So, beware of unfaithfulness. Aminori ad maius. That means from small to great. Okay? Here we've got in this column your talents, your abilities, your wealth, everything that you have in this world. Okay? And Jesus says basically, I really like this. Verses 10 to 12 of the parable. He says, "Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. Whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have been faithful with the dishonest wealth or the unrighteous mammon, who will entrust to you true riches?" So, in this column, this refers to money. Money. It's all about money. But look at this. But essentially, it's talking about wealth. I don't care how much money you've got. You might have $35 million. And you know what Jesus calls that sum of money? He calls it a little. A little. It doesn't matter if you have $1 or 35 million. It's a small thing. Because money is essentially a small thing. And if you're faithful with that little thing, you will be given much. And this over here on this side, this is sort of like eternal. This is your reward. This is the post-mortem, your post-mortem experience. If you're unfaithful with unrighteous mammon, who's going to give you true riches? See, money isn't true riches. You might think so. It makes us comfortable. It fills our belly, satisfies our hunger, and it's nice to have money. It's a real drag not to have money. I've been there too, and it's a real drag not to have money. It's nice to be, I'd rather be rich than poor. But if you're unfaithful with whatever amount of money you have, who's going to give you true riches? In other words, this column over here is really yours. This is really yours. This isn't. Unrighteous mammon to true riches. If you're unfaithful with what is somebody else's, who's going to give you what is your own? This is stewardship. This is discipleship. Jesus wants us to examine every corner of our lives and see what's there, and be faithful in the use of it to serve Him. I really like this parable because essentially it solves one of the problems that we have sometimes as disciples of Jesus, especially in interpreting the Sermon on the Mount, where He makes such unrealistic demands that you look at that and you think, this is impossible. Does Jesus want the impossible from me? No, not really. I think that He says impossible things just so that you don't lower your eyes. He wants you to raise your expectations of yourself and keep raising them. Solves the problem about money. Because you see, it isn't money that is the root of evil. Money is the source of all kinds of evil, but only because it tends to control people and lead them away from serving. So, that kind of, do you have any comments about this, questions about this parable? You guys given any thought about how you can be shrewd in what you do and how you do it? Have you ever thought about that? Wise as serpents, innocent as doves. He wants us to be like that. I've got a friend. His name is Jeff White. He's in charge of, or he's the founder of Survivors. It's a pro-life organization, and they go all over the nation and engage in pro-life, not really pro-life rallies, because what he does is he pretty much goes to pro-choice rallies and interrupts everything that they do. He's very clever about, and he knows all the law. I mean, he is so savvy when it comes to the law that he actually takes advantage of the legal system for the kingdom of God. He does that. I think we need to be that good in what we do. You guys ever heard of Brother Andrew? Yeah. Brother Andrew was called God's smuggler. He used to smuggle Bibles into the Soviet Union. I read a book about his life. It's called God's Smuggler. It's really a good book. Recommend it to you because the guy was really clever, a lot of savvy. He was almost slick, but he did it all for the kingdom. You know what he would do? It's amazing, this guy. He didn't sneak Bibles into the Soviet Union. He would go up to the customs gate and he would have a Bible right on the seat next to him. He would fill his trunk with Bibles, but he wouldn't cover them up. He would just dump them in there. And he would bathe his ministry in prayer. You know, he would drive up there and the customs officer would look in, see the Bible. They were blind to it. He would ask him to open the trunk. He would open the trunk, and the guy wouldn't see the Bibles, and he would let him go in. Huh? They were just laying there. He never made any covert attempt to hide them. He just put them out. He had a rule that he followed in his ministry. He called it the royal way. He was going to do things the royal way, or not at all. Pretty cool book. The guy was really clever. When I started to study this parable, I began to think about him. Okay, so let's switch gears now and talk about a completely different subject. I want to talk about not Jesus as a teacher or a miracle worker or anything else. I want to talk to you guys about something that I have intended to all semester from the very beginning, and that is I want to challenge you with Jesus' humanity. we're very good at thinking of Jesus as divine, and it's easy to think of him as being above the problems that are common to us. Consequently, sometimes it's very hard to actually think of him as a role model. I had this problem. I had a terrible problem with this my first years in college. So much so that I decided that I had much more in common with Paul, you know, the headstrong, arrogant, you know, Paul, that's me. I can empathize with Paul. So I sort of spent quite a few years studying Paul and his epistles and stuff. And I didn't really know how to connect with Jesus, because he was just too good. He was too good. He didn't seem to need the things that I needed. And I don't know whether it was that I just had a hard time thinking of him as a human being, or whether, you know, thinking of him as divine or something. It just it was overwhelming for me. I couldn't do it. But I would like to risk. I would like to risk lowering our Christology long enough for you to see that when Jesus was here, he walked on the earth, just like you and I do. He put on his pants one leg at a time. He went to the bathroom. He got hungry. He got tired. He got frustrated. He got angry. He got scared and nervous. And most all of these very scary human emotions, you can see them demonstrated in one passage, very important passage. So I want to take some time and look at it. It's in the Garden of Gethsemane. According to the Gospel writers, when Jesus was in Jerusalem, one of the places that he liked to go at night was Gethsemane. And he just sometimes would stay there all night long. It was a mountain that was across the valley from the temple. And it's called Gethsemane because Gethsemane means oil press. That's where olives, it's also called the Mount of Olives. That's where olives were actually picked, and they were put through this oil press. They were crushed until they released, you know, their precious oil. That's where all of this happened. And this might be true or not, but I like to imagine that it is. Sometimes I think maybe Jesus enjoyed being there because it brought him some comfort to think that an olive didn't release what it is valued for until it was crushed. One of the reasons I like to go camping is, and I have ever since I was a kid, but as an adult, I like to go camping because after everyone else has gone to bed, I like to sit up at the campfire and just listen to the fire. And it slowly goes out, and so the stars slowly get brighter. But you can put a piece of wood on the ground and it doesn't do a thing. But if you light it on fire, have you ever noticed that sometimes the wood starts to whistle and make music? Have you ever heard it? It will release gases and it'll whistle and it'll snap and crackle. And I just love the sounds. This wood doesn't make music until it's in the fire. And guys, that's what happens to us. I know that it's not fun to be in tight spots and to be nervous and scared about what's going to happen and to suffer. It's not fun. except we are assured from Jesus that we actually are our best when that happens to us. We become better people as a result of it. And so it isn't really something, it isn't something to run away from, because if you're so afraid of discomfort, then you will probably begin to use possessions to avoid it. And I don't think Jesus wants us to do that. I don't think he wants us to use things to avoid discomfort, especially if that discomfort is in the service of righteousness. We become better, stronger people when we're in the fire. It doesn't mean that we like it. Really, if you like it, I think there's something wrong with you. If you're scared, that's okay. If you would rather be somewhere else, that's okay. If you're nervous, anxious, that's okay. Look at what Jesus prays in the garden. I mean, mind you, he's on the threshold of the most painful day of his life. He has seen crucifixions before. He knows what's going to happen to him. And nobody would really want to walk into that, do you think? He prays this. He came out and proceeded, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples also followed him. And when he arrived at the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." So he brought a few disciples with him, and he gives them some really good advice that they spend some time praying, because there's apparently something that they should fear coming. He calls it temptation. And Jesus' suggestion as you face this kind of crisis is that you pray. Some good advice there. Pray that you may not enter into temptation. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and began to pray. Listen to what he prayed. This doesn't sound like Jesus, the Son of God, at all. "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but thine be done." Verse 44. And being in agony, he was praying fervently. His sweat became like drops of blood falling on the ground. I have never prayed like that. You know, we read this and we just read one verse. He prayed, "Father, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but thine." And, you know, but he prayed all night long. I don't know how many times he said that. Sit down and for 1 hour, see how many times you can say that. He prayed all night. Face down, in agony, asking for the Father to let him pass from this. Sweating like drops of blood. I get a lot of comfort in seeing or imagining Jesus here, because I've been in this kind of a hot spot before where I just did not want to be. Just wanted to be anywhere else but there. And it's comforting to me that Jesus had that feeling. He had this feeling. And when he had this feeling, what he did was he just fell on his face in weakness and sought the presence of God. Good advice for us. In Mark, Jesus prays 3 times. In Matthew, he prays these 3 times, plus one more, which is from Q, the Lord's Prayer. In Luke, Luke includes all of Mark's prayers, plus the prayer from Q, plus he has 8 more. You see an emphasis here in Luke? And if you look at these others, you see him praying before important moments. Like before he asks his disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" He prays all night. What does he pray for? Well, I don't know. Use your imagination. Maybe their enlightenment? Maybe that he would be an effectual teacher? Maybe that they would actually be able to comprehend who he was? He asks for God to invade the moment and control it, to be in control of the day. All night long, he says, control the next day. You know what? After he experiences early success in his ministry, Luke says he would go out into the desert alone and pray all night long. It's like, wow, I'm experiencing all of this good stuff. People like me, this is cool. But it was like he was almost afraid of that sort of positive reinforcement. He even bathes his success in prayer, lest he be deceived in some way by it. Before he chooses the 12, he had a lot of disciples, but the day before he selected the 12, he spent the night in prayer. He wanted to make the right choice. He wanted to pick the right people. He prays on the Sermon on the Mount. He prays before he teaches the disciples to pray. This guy's always praying. He was always praying. Do you think it was a charade? Do you think he had to pray? Or do you think he was just showing us that we should pray? I'm amazed that there are some people that think Jesus didn't have to pray. He prayed so that we would know that we should pray. You see, I have a problem with that because I don't think it was a charade. And when Luke says in Luke chapter 4, verse 1, that after the baptism he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, I think, Jesus was a man who was led by the Spirit. And after he left the wilderness and he went to Capernaum, it says he was led by the Spirit to Galilee. Do you think maybe Jesus was a man who had to be led by the Spirit daily? Do you think maybe he was a man who had to pray about tomorrow? Because he just was a little scared about tomorrow. The things that have to happen tomorrow. This subject of Jesus praying, it almost forces me to realize that Jesus was like me. It's not so hard for the disciples to know, right? Because they lived with him, they walked with him, but it's hard for us because, the first thing we learn when we're children is Jesus is God. That's the first thing we learn, right? Jesus is God. I remember when my daughter and I, she was like 4 or 5 years old, we were driving down the street and she'd learned something at her daycare or something, a little Bible study that she had with the daycare teacher. She was going to show me what she knew. And she goes, "Daddy, you see," I hope Regina doesn't see this. She goes, "Daddy, Jesus made everything. He made those trees, he made those houses," and a car went by and she goes, "And he made that house, he made that car." And I'm thinking, well, that's pretty neat, but he didn't quite make the car. But we have, at such an early age, we have such an exalted picture and imagination of Jesus that it's frequently hard to get him back on the ground, isn't it? And imagine he's somebody that experienced fear, anxiety, agony, even entertained the notion of resistance to God. But you see him in prayer, you see this. He's very much like us. He was just much better at being human than we are. Okay? And I guess in that sense, he is a good role model for us. I would love it if you guys could say at the end of this course that Jesus is your hero. Because he really can help you to see how you should live. It's definitely not going to be easy. Life just isn't easy. It's just not. But one thing that Jesus does that no other religious leader from antiquity, not Buddha, not Confucius, not Lao Tzu, not Moses, not Muhammad. Jesus can take the suffering that you experience and make it meaningful. Buddha encourages his disciples to escape suffering. Jesus promises it for you. But he shows us how to live a meaningful life in the midst of it. This is cool, guys. At the end of the day, the sun's starting to come up, and pretty soon the soldiers are going to be walking into the garden, and it says that Jesus rose from prayer, okay? So imagine him all night, laying flat out, pounding the ground, saying, I don't want to do this. I don't mean to be sacrilegious. But he was in a position of weakness. He was down, praying, sweating, agonizing. But the next morning it says he rose from prayer. And this is especially cool in Luke, because Luke puts these two phrases right next to each other, and they're constructed exactly the same, so that every image, every word, every experience is the same, except they're just totally opposite. He rose from prayer. The image of him rising up, strengthened by prayer. He rose up strong, determined, convinced, courageous, perceptive. Bring it on. That's the way he was the next morning. Bring it on. He rose from prayer. They slept from sorrow. How do you want to be? Do you want to face your problems with courage and perception and a confidence that you're walking with God, or not? The way that Jesus got that way in this most terrible night of his life, the way that he got that way was just by inviting God into his experience. The prayers of Jesus in Luke are usually, he's alone, usually it's at night, things are quiet, and you can think. There's no distractions. Obviously, the things that he sought in prayer were guidance and wisdom. for the next day. The way that he lived his life was by being led by the Spirit. It says so in the Gospels. And what he wanted every day and sought in prayer was to saturate his human experience with a quest for God's presence. A more spiritual man you will not find than Jesus. He's what historians of religion call a grand master. There aren't very many grand masters in the history of the human race. Most of them have started religions. Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Muhammad, Handsome Lake, Moses. Grand masters, these guys who are spiritual giants. Jesus was one of those. Believe me, he can show you how to live. Well, I'm going to dismiss you a little early. Do you guys have any questions? Did everyone get signed in? Okay. Let me dismiss you guys in prayer, okay? Jesus, I ask you to fill these students with a desire to be like you. We invite you into our lives, and we want to please you. So I commit them all to you. Teach us how to do beautiful things for you. And give us courage when we face trouble. And I know we will a lot. Help us to seek your guidance, your wisdom. Just show us how to live. You were so good at it. Help us to find comfort even when we're weak, because you were there. It's no shameful thing to be afraid, or even to think about running. So help us to learn how to find courage to face everything that scares us. I ask your blessing on these students and their families. Amen. Okay, thank you guys.